Look, I'm not gonna pretend I'm not a little disappointed. A few weeks ago, I wrote a whole piece about why Scarlett Johansson was almost certainly playing Andrea Beaumont in The Batman Part 2. I laid everything out, connected the dots, I made a compelling case, and I was stoked. I was so down for the Phantasm as the perfect antagonist for Matt Reeves' vision for the sequel to The Batman. And then, because I couldn't let my inner fan get the better of me, I hedged at the end. Because yeah, there's always a decent chance that Scarlett Johansson is playing Gilda Dent, which was another report that was going around. And it turns out that hedge was pretty smart, because based on this recent report, yeah, it's pretty likely Scarlett Johansson is playing Gilda Dent. Reported by Deadline and corroborated by multiple other sources, including The Hollywood Reporter, Sebastian Stan, none other than the Winter Soldier himself, is said to be playing the main antagonist of the film. It was also reported that Barry Keoghan would be reprising his role as the Joker in the film, which indicates to me that Matt Reeves may be adapting more of The Long Halloween than we thought. So we've got Harvey Dent, his wife Gilda, and the Clown Prince of Crime in The Batman Part 2. And I have a lot of thoughts, most of them good, some reservations in the mix. I mean, for starters, The Long Halloween is one of the most famous Batman stories ever. It's arguably the most famous Batman noir story. And not only was it an inspiration for the Batman, but all you have to do is look at a lot of Batman media across the past, 15 or so years. Look at The Dark Knight. The Long Halloween was the primary comic inspiration for that film. It's a story that a lot of people gravitate towards because I think it is a quintessential Batman story. And I get why filmmakers are drawn to it. I mean, there's a lot of potential to play in the sandbox of Gotham there. It is the entire systemic rot of the city in an entire story, and the entire dilemma of Bruce in his crusade, and then the fall of Harvey Dent, which is obviously iconic. It's an incredibly compelling narrative with both Bruce Wayne and Harvey Dent at its center. However, I can't help but feel like we keep going back to that text for Batman stories, which is frustrating because there's plenty more rogues out there the Batman films haven't even touched and or are ripe for reinvention. I'm not saying that Matt Reeves is going to do a comic-accurate adaptation of The Long Halloween, but there are clearly pieces in play here that indicates he's going to be pulling heavily from that text. And that leads to my ultimate worry for this film, which is that it's going to be The Dark Knight to the Batman's Batman Begins, a case where the Batman perfectly established an interesting aesthetic and vibe and tone that fits the darkness of Batman in the environment he prowls around. It's slightly heightened, but real enough so as to remain grounded. The same was true of Batman Begins. I mean, a lot of people still point to that film and The Narrows as a quintessential ideal version of Gotham. And that's not to say that the urban grits and intense realism of Chicago in The Dark Knight wasn't effective. It's incredibly effective. I mean, The Dark Knight transcends the comic book genre, and something like that hadn't been done at that point in time, and it was inspired. Doing a heat riff with a comic book movie really proved that these films could be taken seriously if the filmmaker took the proper care to do so. But let's face it, we aren't in that era anymore, and the whole Dark Knight-inspired comic book movie is a bit played out by this point. And while there's a sense of realism in Reeves' Batman world, it's more elastic, more heightened. The Riddler's plan consisted of blowing up the dams around the city to flood it. I mean, it's just the most supervillain shit you could imagine. And on top of that, there's also some clear inspiration from the Adam West series thrown into the mix, just filtered through a bit of a modern lens and taken more seriously rather than being the campy, pulpy, over-the-top show that we know the West series to be. I mean, look at the fucking cowl. He loves the eyebrows. Matt Reeves loves the eyebrows, and you know what? I do too. So while, yes, Reeves' Batman world is realistic and going in a more realistic direction like The Dark Knight isn't outside the realm of believability, I also think The Batman is more moody, pulpy, noir-inspired, and most people want him to really lean into that. It's what separates his films from everything that's come before. I fear that if they take too much from The Long Halloween, they risk being dwarfed by The Dark Knight. They risk The Batman 2 being like, oh, okay, they're basically doing The Dark Knight again. And while I get that The Dark Knight isn't a one-to-one adaptation of The Long Halloween, to the majority of people, it will feel like similar broad strokes, and I think that Batman has proven that he can be more than that. There are more fantastical stories that you can tell, but the idea of Mr. Freeze could work in this universe. Clayface could work in this universe if you just give it a little bit of a push. The Reeves verse is already straddling that line between heightened supernatural isms and then also this incredibly gothic, realistic environment. The Gotham of the Matt Reeves universe feels more dystopian than a direct mirror to our reality. And I think that's the thing Reeves needs to double down on for The Batman 2. While I know that this isn't the whole point of The Long Halloween, the whole idea of the Dark Knight versus the White Knight was the very core of The Dark Knight and is a big part of The Long Halloween as a text. And that idea is executed about as perfectly as you could do in The Dark Knight. I guess my only concern is, why would you do it again? I get corruption is at the center of Reeves Batman films thematically, so I guess we should expect something like that. And there's definitely more than one way to tackle this idea. The Dark Knight isn't the only way to do it, but it is one of those things where it's like, oh, it's the second installment and it's already kind of lining up to follow the trajectory of the Nolan trilogy, just with slightly different aesthetics. There is a way all the Harvey Dent stuff can work and will feel less like another version of the Dark Knight, and I'm going to get into that a bit later on, but the most important thing is that I trust Matt Reeves and co-writer Mattson Tomlin. They've shown that they get the character, and they aren't going to strictly adapt one Batman comic. The Batman took inspiration from The Long Halloween, yes, but also Batman Year One and Zero Year and other stuff like that. I think the thing with Reeves and Tomlin is that they've shown they take a confluence of influences and create something new. So while I'm a bit less interested in seeing them adapt parts of The Long Halloween again, the silver lining is that, if done well, we could also see them incorporating elements of Dark Victory, the sequel to The Long Halloween, and the introduction of Robin. Yeah, you bet your ass I'm gonna get my Robin plug in here. The boy's gotta be in the Batman Part 2, please, for the love of God. And then also, I'm still not giving up hope on Phantasm. I know I already covered that in the previous video, and it's probably not very likely that she's going to be playing Phantasm, but I think there's a way you can take elements of that character and infuse it with the Gilda Dent character, which we'll touch on in a bit. And then Jeff Snyder has also mentioned the fact that they're looking to include Harvey's father. Whether or not he's abusive or not remains to be seen, but it suggests they're going deeper into Harvey's psychology than The Dark Knight ever did, because it's more about how this city poisons the minds of its inhabitants, how it fucks with people and shapes them into the characters that we know them to be. And while I would have liked to have seen them go in a different direction, focusing on different antagonists that we haven't seen in previous films before, I also just want to say, I do love Harvey Dent. I think he's a fun addition to Batman, especially when he and Bruce are childhood friends. I also think he's an essential addition to any Batman story eventually. My hope is that throughout the course of the Batman Part 2, he's just going to be the district attorney. He's just going to be Harvey Dent, and we're not going to see the turn to Two Face. Perhaps that's something they'll save for the third film or later down the line. I don't think we've ever gotten enough time with Harvey just being Harvey. I know that the version from The Long Halloween is like the iconic version of the character, but I also think there are other stories to tell with Harvey Dent. Yes, he's interesting when there's the fall from grace and everything, but when he becomes a part of the city's criminal underground, there's some really interesting stuff there, like him in the Arkham games with Penguin, that rivalry. It would be fun to build towards that because Colin Farrell would play that perfectly, and Sebastian's Harvey would be a great mobster as well. The only catch here, and the reason why I don't think they'll necessarily go that route, is that Penguin is already at that point, and Harvey isn't Two-Face yet, so I doubt anything happens. I mean, it is possible. Maybe Penguin's the one that blows Harvey's face up because of something going on, and they become mob rivals or whatever. I have no idea. But the ultimate question is whether what they're doing is different enough from what Christopher Nolan already did. And I think it can be, but they've got to be careful. The Dark Knight's Harvey was a crusading district attorney who got caught in the crossfire between Batman and the Joker. He was the Joker's ace in the hole, proof that good men don't stay good, and that these civilized people will drop all of their moral codes and whatever when shit hits them too personally. I think where Reeves could go that would differ from what Nolan's done is make Harvey the actual focal point. I mean, clearly the reports are saying that Pattinson's Bruce Wayne persona and Stan's Harvey Dent are going to be at the center of this story, and it's going to be a story about those two men. And that's really interesting because it will make his fall the actual story and not just an incidental thing that happens. And I'm not saying Harvey's fall isn't a big part of The Dark Knight, but there's clearly larger ideas at play that all of these characters sort of represent. Reeves could really hone in on the character of Harvey and make him a main player in the story. He He could explore the psychology of that fall, the slow erosion of principles, the way trauma doesn't just happen to you, but changes who you fundamentally are. Now, I've seen some people say that, oh, well, because Sebastian Stan isn't confirmed as Harvey Dent, there's still the possibility that he could be playing Hush. While I'm less inclined to believe this, Hush has been rumored for a while now, and while I don't find that character particularly interesting, really, it's Jim Lee that deserves the credit for making the character an icon. I mean, his look is everything. There's no denying his backstory offers fertile ground that is in conversation with the revelations about Gotham's corrupt past and Bruce's parents from The Batman. The best way to adapt Hush, in my opinion, would be to incorporate his backstory into a character like Harvey Dent. Now, yes, they did some of that with the Riddler, but it wasn't to the fullest extent I think they could have gone. This would allow Reeves to use Harvey while sticking to what he said in a previous interview about the villain being someone who hasn't really been seen in a film before. Obviously, that could apply to Scarlett Johansson's character, but he could also be referring to how they're adapting Harvey Dent, especially if Dent doesn't become Two-Face in the film, or doesn't become Two-Face until the end. So you have a Harvey who has the backstory of Hush, so there's more of a personal connection between him and Bruce. You can dive into the sins of their respective parents, which the Batman was clearly teeing up. Harvey's abusive upbringing that showed him the cruel nature of living in Gotham, something he's hell-bent on fixing. And then Bruce, who used the tragedy of his parents to justify taking his anger out on the city, only to realize that his parents were kind of corrupt, and so then recognizes he has to do more as Bruce Wayne. While I really like the idea of Sebastian Stan playing Harvey, it almost falls into Reddit fan casting. You know what I mean? Like, of course the guy who's played characters dealing with duality in films like A Different Man, The Apprentice, Fresh, hell, even fucking Bucky, who is split in two by the person he was, the person he is, and everything he's done as the Winter Soldier. I get the appeal, really. Getting someone with the kind of looks of a leading man but the resume of a weirdo character actor, which I mean complimentary, that's kinda Harvey. Sebastian Stan can clearly explore duality in an interesting way and the distortion of self-image that complements what they want to do with Bruce. It's not that he's wrong for the role. I think all of the points I mentioned about him being an actor who explores duality in interesting ways is exactly why he'll kill it. Plus, similar to Scarlett Johansson, he brings prestige talent to the film. It's more so that he's kind of a Tumblr boy, just the very obvious choice for this role. One people fan cast and everything because they love Bucky, which makes it hard to take seriously and feels like a bit of a safe choice. None of this is Sebastian Stan's fault, mind you, and I'm sure when I see the film, I'll love what he does with the character, but it feels safe. This definitely feels like the same Reeves who wanted Jonah Hill as the Penguin. Would Jonah Hill have been a solid Penguin? I mean, yeah, probably, but because he didn't get him, it forced Reeves to think outside of the box, get creative with the choice, and then we got the inspired casting of Colin Farrell, who's arguably the best on-screen Penguin we've ever gotten. No shade to Danny DeVito, but fucking hell, he's one of the best comic book villains ever put to screen after that Penguin series. Sometimes the obvious choice is great, and that could be the case with Sebastian Stan here, but sometimes it's worth that second look at someone who doesn't immediately fit the mold. Plus, Stan has spent the better part of a decade in comic book movies, and yes, I get these Batman films are prestigious. They've got like A-list level talent and are attracting the cream of the crop really when it comes to talent. But still, with stuff like A Different Man, I was really hoping he was kind of turning the page and going into a more interesting character actor direction. But here's the other thing that I will say that could be interesting if Reeves leverages this. You've got Robert Pattinson, who is just an absolute freak, and I mean that in the best way possible. Conventionally attractive leading man, but a weirdo underneath, and that's why he's a perfect Batman. Then you've got Sebastian Stan, who has some weirdo sensibilities. I mean, he's a great character for that reason, but he kind of keeps a lid on it. Or perhaps Sebastian Stan tries to keep up appearances and represses his inner freak until it explodes and he becomes Two-Face. Whereas with Robert Pattinson, his Bruce Wayne is already used to that duality, and so he doesn't really care that his Bruce Wayne is an ultimate freak because he knows it. I have no idea if any of that makes sense, but to me, that would make for an interesting dynamic that leverages both actors' personas as character actors and sometimes leading men. Now let's get back to the Scarlett Johansson of it all. If Johansson is indeed playing Gilda Dent, I'll be sad, but there's still potential for her to be more than just Harvey's wife. In The Long Halloween, Gilda is revealed as the original holiday killer, someone who murdered criminals to lighten her husband's workload. It's one of the most tragic twists in Batman comics because her actions ultimately contribute to Harvey's destruction, which I definitely think will be the focal point of this film and why I'm inclined to believe that Johansson is still going to be the main antagonist, and there still may even be a way for Gilda and Bruce to have a history. It could just add to the tension between Bruce and Harvey. I guess that risks turning into the Rachel thing again from The Dark Knight, where both Bruce and Harvey have romantic ties to the same woman, Bruce an old flame and Harvey her husband, but the idea that Gilda succumbing to the city's worst impulses would clearly have an effect on both men, yeah, I think that's something that is still worth exploring. For Bruce, it could be a case of him recognizing Batman alone sets the wrong example, the very thing he learned at the end of The Batman, but developed a bit more since the lesson was for him to recognize that being a vigilante with personal vendettas was contributing toxically to the city, inspiring people like the Riddler, and that Bruce Wayne is needed to do the hard work the city needs to combat. Batman is kind of like the mascot, I guess, right? He's the symbol. He represents something bigger than any one person. For Harvey, Gilda being the killer could be confirmation of something he's been fighting inside, that it's impossible to be, as The Dark Knight says,
decent men in an indecent time.
That to deal with the city, you have to play by its rules. So he spirals, he stops believing in the system he dedicated his life to. Maybe the reveal that Gilda is the holiday killer, or Phantasm, or whoever pushes Harvey to give up since it was someone close to him. He almost succumbs to the belief that the city is beyond saving, which is how he becomes Two Face somehow. Could even be a case where after that realization, the Penguin attacks, leaving half of his face scarred and teeing up the Batman 3, and then also teeing up that criminal underground rivalry between the Penguin and Two-Face that I think would really be cool to see. And then you have Bruce, who, upon recognizing someone close to him succumbed to the cruel nature of the city, uses it to galvanize his crusade, recognizing there is a need for both Batman and Bruce Wayne. Harvey was right initially that there needs to be systemic reform, but then he sort of gives up when it gets personal. Bruce is the inverse of that, where he starts personal and then learns to think bigger and sees the need for systemic reform, but also the need for Batman to ensure that the systemic reform has a chance. The city needs someone with a face, but Batman can also be there to represent something more, to get people on their feet, get the city stable. All of this sounds great. It makes me stoked on the potential for the Batman 2. But then there's a little Joker-sized problem that I'm just kind of like, ugh, come on. Barry Keoghan returning as the Joker. I don't know how the Joker fits into all of this, and again, I really don't want him to be a part of this story very much, considering how much Joker we've been inundated with, really, since fucking Jack Nicholson, played him on screen for the first time. We've had so many different versions, each equally as interesting, Jared Leto's isn't that interesting, but you get my point. The character has been done to death at this point, and while at some points, yeah, I want to see Joker and Batman in a movie together because they are a pairing that needs to be, I want these movies to try new things, try other rogues, because there are other villains in Batman's canon that are equally as interesting as the Joker. You just gotta give him a chance. And I'll be honest, I don't really love this iteration of the Joker. Now granted, we just had a small scene at the end of The Batman and then that deleted scene, but that was enough to make me go, this just feels like Barry Keoghan trying too hard to be the Joker. It's just like, whoa, look how crazy I am. It feels like the most generic version of the Joker. Now, again, very limited sample size here. I made an entire video ranting about this very scene and everything wrong with it, but I still stand by it. I didn't really dig what he was doing with that character. I guess if the Joker has to be in this film. The way that he could work is that if he's a Hannibal Lecter-like figure, giving Bruce intel on the Holiday Killer or Phantasm, whichever route they go for Gilda or Andrea Beaumont. I have no idea who that character is going to be. And it would be a nice way of reworking the Calendar Man role for the story, which is a part of The Long Halloween they haven't adapted yet. I guess the only thing is, like, Batman and the Joker don't have a relationship in this universe just yet, so there would have to be something the Joker has or knows that would force Bruce to talk with him. Maybe it starts out with Gordon trying to get information, but that doesn't work because the Joker is only willing to talk to Batman because he's infatuated by him. Big Silence of the Lambs energy for sure, and it could make for some fun banter. And while I didn't love Barry's take on the Joker in the very limited scenes that I saw of him, there is still potential for him to adjust. In a full movie, it could actually work. The biggest thing, though, is that, Jesus Christ, please fix his look, because holy hell is it an abomination in the definition of edgelord. Just retcon that whole look. Reeves, what were you thinking, man? And so if they're gonna pull from all of these elements that haven't been adapted on screen from Long Halloween, they might also be pulling from Dark Victory, because, yeah, it's the sequel. That's the story that introduces Dick Grayson as Robin, and thematically, like I've said so many times before, Robin makes sense. Robin represents the future and possibility of the city, someone who endures tragedy and who Bruce saves, helping them become better than he or Dent or Gilda, who were fucked by the system, ever could be. Someone who decides to become a hero out of a pure desire to ensure that the tragedy that befell him doesn't happen to anyone else. True to the spirit of Dick Grayson, he's the best version of who Batman is. Someone with a traumatic backstory, but who doesn't let that trauma define him or pull him in directions. He's not as unstable as Bruce, because Bruce was there to mentor him, to guide him. He instead uses his trauma and his pain to motivate him, to do work to make things better. This is all thanks to Bruce thinking bigger and beyond himself in his pain, which I think is going to be a core idea at the center of this film. So it's still sort of the same thing I was talking about in regard to Phantasm, where it's Bruce being caught between the past and the future, loyalty to an old friend, a childhood best friend, and doing the right thing to ensure the city has more Dick Graysons, the past pulling him back and the future pulling him forward, what he was versus what he could be, that dichotomy. I think regardless of who these characters actually are, those ideas, that's going to be the thing driving the narrative. So I guess ultimately what I'm working through here is my own feelings about the announcement of Sebastian Stan as Harvey Dent. Part of me is disappointed that we're not going to get the Phantasm story I was hoping for. At least I'm assuming that's going to be the case. Again, maybe they give Gilda Phantasm's backstory, or maybe it's not even Gilda, maybe it's Andrea Beaumont and she's Harvey Dent's partner. So I have no idea. And then part of me is also worried about the obvious Dark Knight comparisons and taking too much from The Long Halloween. Part of me recognizes that Matt Reeves hasn't let me down yet and probably knows what he's doing better than anyone. I mean, he spent so many years working on this script. I mean, it's gotta be fucking great. And these movies are clearly dealing with the idea of corruption and how do we eradicate systemic corruption. It's in The Batman, it was all over the Penguin, and Harvey Dent is maybe the ultimate expression of that theme. A good man corrupted, a believer destroyed by the very system he tried to save. It makes sense that Reeves would want to tell that story eventually. The question is whether he can tell it in a way that feels distinct from what Nolan already accomplished, distinct from any other Batman adaptation that has been pulling from The Long Halloween over the years. And based on everything we know, at least the ingredients are there for something somewhat different. A deeper dive into Harvey's psychology, a more prominent role for his wife, the incorporation of Robin, God willing, please. The continued exploration of Bruce learning to be both Batman and Bruce Wayne. For now, I'm cautiously optimistic. Not as stoked as I was about the Scarlett Johansson casting, but I still am pretty excited to see what Sebastian Stan is going to do, because he's a great actor. And while I think the Harvey Dent, the man side, we clearly know how he's probably going to play, there is something about the Two Face side of it that I'm like, how is he going to be with that? How erratic is he going to be? Are they actually going to have him be this split personality? I just wish they'd stop pulling from the same Batman comics for these film adaptations. That's kind of why I'm really excited for The Brave and the Bold, because they're pulling from something completely different. The Damian Wayne stuff, like, I'm really excited for that, but I'm also really excited for the Batman too, because the pieces are in place for something special. An auteur who has a fascination with one of the biggest comic book characters of all time, and he's going to give it his all to make sure that it's a damn good movie. And then maybe in part 3, it'll build to the damn Court of Owls everyone wants to see. I still think there's a chance that happens, but you know what? For now, let's just see what they build.